The late summer sun in Red Mesa Valley didn't just beat down, it punished. Jesse Walker could feel it searing through his faded t-shirt, baking the dust into his skin. The horizon shimmered like molten glass, and the red sands seemed to stretch into forever. Out here, even the wind had teeth, slashing across the plains in dry, blistering gusts. He adjusted the worn army cap on his head and squinted down the fence line, sighing under his breath. Half the posts were leaning like old men caught in a storm, and the wire sagged in places like it was giving up altogether. Just like the ranch, he thought bitterly. Just like me. Jesse had come back to this forsaken slice of land because there was nowhere else left to go. After Afghanistan, after the hospital stays, after too many restless nights and too many mornings waking up without knowing why he'd made it back when others hadn't. Red Mesa Valley was the last place with his name on it. His grandfather's old ranch, handed down with a will written in a shaky hand and a note that simply read, "Come home, Jesse." You'll know why when you do. Most days, Jesse wasn't so sure about that. Kicking at a rock with the toe of his boot, he wandered further down the fence, idly checking for breaks he already knew were there. No cattle, no crops, just stubborn mesquite trees and a broken barn that leaned worse with every passing storm. He was debating whether he should tear the whole damn thing down or just let it fall when something strange caught his ear. At first, he thought it was the wind. A high, thin whimper carried through the heat. Jesse froze, frowning. It came again, faint but urgent, threading its way between the gusts. A sound of something alive, something hurting. He didn't think. His body moved before his mind caught up, boots pounding across the brittle ground toward the noise. The closer he got, the sharper the sound grew. Ragged breathing, soft whinnies cut short by pain. His gut clenched. Rounding a patch of stubborn cactus and scrub, Jesse stumbled upon a scene that punched the air from his lungs. 3 young Mustangs lay tangled in a cruel mess of ropes and crude snares. Their bodies heaved with exhausted, shallow breaths, sides flecked with sweat and blood where the cords had cut into their hides. The traps were simple but brutal, loops tightened around legs, bellies and necks, staked into the dirt with rusted metal rods. The biggest foal, a slate-gray beauty with a coat like storm clouds, stood shakily on trembling legs. It tossed its head weakly, defiance burning in wide, terrified eyes. Beside it, a smaller one, deep copper red, its body taut with barely suppressed panic, whimpered as it tried and failed to free itself. The third, a pale cream-colored foal, barely moved at all, its sides fluttering with every labored gasp. Jesse swallowed hard. "Easy now," he murmured, dropping to a knee and reaching slowly into his pocket for the multi-tool knife he always carried. "I'm not the one who did this to you." The gray foal, Ash, the word popped into Jesse's mind without warning, pinned its ears back, but didn't lunge or bolt. It was too exhausted for that. Jesse worked the blade carefully, sawing at the rough rope around the smallest foal first. The twine snapped with a harsh pop, and the cream-colored youngster whimpered, but didn't move. "Hang on, little one," Jesse whispered. Next came the copper foal. It thrashed weakly, nearly knocking him sideways, but Jesse murmured soothing nonsense until it stilled enough for him to cut the binds. Blood oozed from raw wounds where the rope had chafed the skin, and Jesse's heart twisted. Finally, he approached Ash. The gray foal stood rigid, every muscle screaming distrust. Jesse moved slowly, holding the blade low, his voice low and steady. "I know, buddy, I wouldn't trust me either." A few tense minutes later, the last rope fell away, and Ash staggered forward, nostrils flaring. Jesse stood there for a moment, surrounded by wounded, terrified life, feeling the weight of it settle into his bones. He had no idea what the hell he was doing. He barely knew how to take care of himself these days, much less 3 battered Mustangs. But leaving them out here, alone, that wasn't going to happen. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Jesse jogged back to his pickup, the old Ford wheezing in protest as he shoved it into gear and backed it toward the trapped foals. He scrounged a battered tarp from behind the seat, laying it across the bed of the truck to soften the ride. It was clumsy, awkward work. Ash refused to be lifted, stubbornly hobbling onto the makeshift ramp Jesse rigged from a couple of old boards. Copper tried to bolt and ended up collapsing halfway up the ramp, forcing Jesse to half carry, half push it into the bed. The little cream foal, Luna, he thought, was barely conscious, a featherweight against his chest as he lifted her. By the time they were all loaded, Jesse's arms shook with exhaustion and his shirt was soaked through. He checked the knots securing them, loose enough not to hurt, tight enough they wouldn't tumble out, and climbed into the cab. The truck rattled and bucked over the rough ground as he headed back toward the ranch house. Jesse kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting the foals to panic and kick the sides out. But they lay still, spent beyond fear. The old house rose into view like a mirage. Peeling paint, sagging porch, one window boarded over. Jesse slowed, pulling up near the barn. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the crumbling outbuildings, the lifeless yard. "You're out of your mind," he thought. Then he opened the door and got out. He coaxed them down one by one. Copper stumbled, catching itself against Jesse's side. Luna nearly folded in half but stayed on her feet by some miracle. Ash came last, stepping down like a proud warrior, battered but unbowed. Jesse led them to the barn, swinging open the wide double doors. Dust and the stale scent of old hay and older manure rushed out to meet him. He coughed, waving a hand in front of his face. "Home, sweet home," he muttered grimly. Inside, he cleared a stall, kicking aside broken boards and half-rotted straw. He found an old water trough, dragged it under the pump, and cranked the rusted handle until a trickle of water gushed out. He filled the trough and stood back, watching. Ash approached first, ears flicking warily, then lowered its muzzle to drink. Copper followed, nudging Jesse's hip as if in thanks before diving into the water. Luna hung back, trembling, until Jesse knelt and splashed a little water toward her. She sniffed, stepped closer, and finally drank. Jesse leaned against the stall rail, heart hammering. He hadn't planned this. Hell, he didn't plan anything anymore. But here he was. 3 lives depending on him, whether he was ready or not. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars blinked into existence over Red Mesa, Jesse dragged an old folding chair into the barn. He sat down heavily, boots planted in the dirt, watching over the foals as they huddled together for comfort. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was just passing through. For the first time since coming home, he felt needed. Jesse Walker closed his eyes, the desert wind rattling the tin roof above him. He wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, he had a reason to stay. The next morning, Jesse woke to the thin light creeping through the cracked slats of the barn walls. His back ached from the concrete-hard cot he'd dragged inside. But as he sat up, the faint sounds of life pulled him forward. Soft snorts. The shuffle of hooves against straw. He wasn't alone anymore. He pushed open the stall door, blinking against the dusty beams of sunlight cutting through the air. The 3 young Mustangs stirred inside their makeshift pen, each a ghost of the night before, but somehow still fighting. Ash, the gray, stood stiffly at the far end, his silver coat marred with crusted blood where the ropes had torn him. His eyes locked on Jesse with a wary sharpness that didn't belong in something so young. Copper, the red-coated one, paced back and forth with restless energy, occasionally tossing his head and letting out short, frustrated whinnies. And Luna, the pale, cream-colored filly, lay curled near the water pan, her sides heaving with shallow breaths, too weak even to lift her head when Jesse approached. "Morning, little warriors," Jesse muttered, grabbing a battered bucket to refill their water. His voice cracked with the kind of roughness that came from too many silent nights and too many second guesses. The work was slow, clumsy. Jesse had never cared for horses, not like this. Back when he was a kid, his grandpa kept a few for riding, and Jesse learned enough not to spook them. But that was years ago, before war had stripped his life down to survival and memory. Now, every gesture felt foreign, every move tentative. He cleaned their wounds with warm water fetched from the rusty old hand pump out back. Luna whimpered when he dabbed her hind leg, and Jesse murmured an apology so soft it barely left his throat. Copper flinched at the touch but didn't kick, and Ash just stood there, rigid and glaring, daring Jesse to get it wrong. By noon, Jesse knew he had to call them something more than just colors and shapes in his head. They deserved that much. "You," he said, pointing to the gray, "you're Ash." Tough little bastard, burnt around the edges but still standing. Ash twitched an ear but otherwise didn't move. He turned to the red one next. "And you, Hellfire," Jesse chuckled under his breath as Copper tried once again to rear against the loose rope tie. "You're Copper, hot-headed troublemaker." Finally, his gaze softened as he crouched beside Luna. She blinked up at him, too tired to flinch. Jesse brushed his fingertips lightly over her dusty forehead. "And you," he said, voice gentling, "you're Luna. Light in the middle of all this damn darkness." The names settled into the air like a prayer, whispered into a church long abandoned. Throughout the afternoon, Jesse worked to clear a corner of the barn. He swept out layers of old hay and rat droppings, cursing every creaky muscle in his back. Every now and then, he'd glance toward the stall and catch Ash watching him, unblinking. Luna slept most of the time, and Copper kept trying to chew through the rope he was tied to. By evening, the ranch looked a little less like a graveyard and a little more like something that might breathe again. Jesse even managed to rig a broken-down fan to the rafters, moving a sluggish wave of cooler air over the barn floor. As the last light bled out over the mesa, Jesse leaned against the open barn door, sipping a lukewarm beer he'd found hidden in the depths of the dusty kitchen. The world stretched wide before him. Endless red sand, fading blue sky, stars just beginning to blink awake. He was halfway through draining the bottle when something shifted in the corner of his eye. Movement. Quick, low to the ground. Jesse froze, instincts kicking in hard and fast. He set the bottle down without a sound, sliding his hand to the handle of the old .22 rifle he kept propped just inside the barn. A shadow crept along the fence line. A man slinking in the darkness like a damn coyote. Jesse's heart hammered against his ribs. He squinted, catching the glint of something metallic. Maybe wire cutters, maybe worse. Before Jesse could move, a savage, bone-deep howl ripped through the night. Ash. The young Mustang, usually silent as stone, let loose a sound that didn't belong to anything tame. A furious, raw-throated scream that echoed across the empty fields. The figure by the fence startled, stumbled, and bolted into the darkness without a backward glance. Jesse lowered the rifle slowly, heart still jackhammering. He turned to Ash, who stood braced in the stall, head high, muscles quivering. The other two Mustangs had pressed themselves against the far wall, wide-eyed and trembling, But Ash had chosen to fight. Jesse exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He crossed the dirt floor and knelt outside the stall door, locking eyes with the defiant little gray colt. "You saw him before I did," Jesse whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "You saved us." Ash snorted, a short, sharp blast of air, and finally, he lowered his head just an inch, a tiny concession, a first crack in the wall between them. That night, Jesse didn't bother going back to the house. He bedded down right there in the barn, the old shotgun laid across his lap, the stars wheeling overhead through the broken roof beams. For the first time since he'd stepped off that damn plane from Afghanistan, Jesse Walker felt the stirrings of something he thought he'd left on the battlefield. Purpose. And this time, it wasn't about fighting a war. It was about keeping 3 broken little hearts beating. And maybe, just maybe, healing his own in the process. The days in Red Mesa Valley rolled by under an endless sky, each one harder than the last. Jesse threw himself into caring for Ash, Copper, and Luna. The ranch, once a relic of forgotten dreams, began to stir with a fragile kind of life. Every creak of the barn, every thud of hooves, every cautious nicker from the stalls wove threads of meaning into the empty spaces Jesse had carried inside him since the war. Still, an unease gnawed at him. It wasn't just the memory of Derek Sloan's shadow flickering across the fence line, or the clawing suspicion that somewhere, someone was still watching. It was the way Ash sometimes froze, ears pinned back, gaze fixed on the horizon long before Jesse heard anything. Or the way Luna trembled at night when the wind howled, or how Copper, ever the troublemaker, kept sniffing along the fence, always at the same spot near the south field, as if expecting someone to return. It didn't take long for trouble to find them again. One crisp morning, just as Jesse finished mucking out the stalls, a worn, tan pickup rumbled down the dusty road and pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, solid build, cowboy hat low over serious blue eyes, a badge pinned to his chest. Sheriff Dean Rourke. Jesse leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, feeling the weight of another conversation he didn't particularly want. "Morning," the sheriff said, voice rough like gravel. "You, Jesse Walker?" "That's me." The sheriff stuck out a hand. Jesse hesitated a second before taking it, feeling the calloused grip. "Name's Dean Rourke. Heard through town you're the one that rescued those 3 foals." Jesse narrowed his eyes. News travels fast. In a place like this, it flies faster than the dust storms. Rourke nodded toward the barn. "Mind if I take a look?" Jesse thought about lying, about making some excuse, but something about the sheriff's posture said he wasn't here to cause trouble. He pushed the door open wider. Inside, Ash stood alert in the nearest stall, eyes sharp and unblinking. Copper napped in a messy sprawl of hay. Luna peered out from the shadows, wary but curious. The sheriff's gaze softened. "Mustangs, huh? Not exactly what you expect to find trussed up like hogs." "Yeah, well, someone sure didn't have their best interests at heart," Jesse said, voice tightening. Rourke walked slowly past the stalls, hands resting lightly on his belt. "I'll be straight with you. There's been whispers, horses disappearing out here. A lot of folks think it's just rustlers, but—" He scratched his chin. "This feels different." "How different?" Jesse asked. "Bad different, organized, maybe even sanctioned by someone with a lot of pull." Jesse stiffened. "Sanctioned?" Rourke met his gaze evenly. "You got enemies you don't even know about yet, son. Be careful." Before Jesse could press him, another truck pulled up, an old blue Ford with a faded veterinary logo on the door. Out climbed Dr. Eliza Monroe, a wiry woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a gait that spoke of a life spent in the saddle. She offered Jesse a tight smile as she approached. "You're Walker's grandson, right? Jesse?" "That's right, ma'am. Your granddad and I went way back." She patted his shoulder. "He would have liked knowing you're looking after this place. And these three." She nodded toward the foals. "Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest," Jesse said, stepping aside. Dr. Monroe moved with surprising grace, examining Ash's leg first, then Copper's rib cage, then Luna's trembling flank. Her face darkened as she lifted Luna's hind leg to reveal a faint brand, nearly invisible under the cream coat. "This ain't wild stock," she muttered. "Not completely, anyway." Jesse's stomach turned. "What do you mean?" She straightened, brushing hay off her jeans. "These foals, they're Mustangs, sure, but someone's been breeding them, controlled bloodlines. Probably for speed, endurance, maybe even aggression." "A rancher?" Jesse guessed. Dr. Monroe shook her head. "No rancher would dump animals like this. No, this smells like something else. Something uglier." A chill ran down Jesse's spine. Before he could ask more, the sheriff's radio crackled at his hip. He muttered a curse and stepped outside to answer it. That's when Jesse noticed him. A man, lean, sun-baked, with sharp cheekbones and a cautious gait, leaned casually against the barn fence. He wore dusty jeans, a battered leather jacket, and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. Jesse tensed immediately, stepping between the stranger and the barn. "Looking for something?" he called out. The man smiled, lazy but not unkind. "Name's Lucas Grant," he said. "Mind if I have a word?" Jesse didn't relax, but he didn't slam the door in the guy's face either. He nodded once, sharp and wary. Lucas sauntered closer, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to warn you." "About what?" Lucas lowered his voice. "You stumbled onto something bigger than you know. The foals you saved, they're part of a project. GEC, Genetic Enhancement Consortium, private outfit. Been experimenting with selective breeding for years. Combat animals, performance stock, you name it." Jesse's heart thudded painfully in his chest. Why would anyone trap them out here? Because they didn't measure up. Faulty stock gets disposed of. Lucas's jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to find them." Jesse's fists curled at his sides. "So now what? They send people like Derek Sloan after me?" Lucas gave a grim smile. "Sloan was just the start. If they think you're a threat, they'll escalate. Fast." Before Jesse could ask another question, a deafening crash split the air. The barn door rattled violently. From inside, Ash's shrill battle cry whinny rang out like a siren. Jesse and Lucas sprinted back into the barn. One of the stall windows had shattered inward. A masked figure, all in black, lunged through the broken frame, a taser in hand. Ash was faster. With a guttural roar, the gray foal charged, slamming into the intruder's chest with shocking force. The man toppled backward, landing hard in the dust, gasping for air. He scrambled up and bolted, disappearing into the desert scrub beyond the fence. Ash snorted, pawing the ground as if daring the man to come back. Lucas blew out a breath. "Damn, you've got a fighter." Jesse sank to his knees by Ash, hands shaking. "You saved me, buddy," he whispered. Ash nuzzled Jesse's shoulder briefly, a gesture so tender it nearly undid him. For the first time in years, Jesse didn't feel hollow inside. He felt rooted, tethered by the raw, desperate need of three creatures who had no one else. And maybe, just maybe, he realized he needed them just as much as they needed him. Outside, the desert wind howled through Red Mesa Valley, carrying dust and secrets across the painted sands. And Jesse Walker knew the fight was only just beginning. The sun dipped low behind Red Mesa, bleeding the sky into 1,000 shades of crimson and gold. The air was heavy, charged with something more than just heat. It was the kind of tension that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, even when the world around you was still. Jesse stood on the front porch of the ranch house, a battered Winchester resting against the worn railing. Ash stood beside him, the gray Mustang's ears twitching, muscles coiled as if sensing the storm brewing beyond the fence line. Down by the barn, Copper paced, kicking up little clouds of dust, his usual playful energy sharpened into restlessness. Luna stayed close to the shadows, her creamy coat catching the dying light, head low but eyes wide and alert. They all felt it, the coming reckoning. The first truck appeared just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the horizon. Its headlights cut twin spears through the settling dusk, illuminating the dirt road leading straight to the heart of Jesse's land. Then another, and another. 3 vehicles total, black and unmarked, their engines growling low like predators circling prey. Jesse tightened his grip on the rifle, heart pounding against his ribs. "Showtime," he muttered under his breath. The trucks came to a slow halt near the paddock. Doors opened. Men spilled out, dozen or more, all clad in dark tactical gear. At their center stood Victor Maddox, tall, square-shouldered, and radiating the cold confidence of a man who had never been told no. Victor called out across the open space, voice booming, "Jesse Walker! You got something that belongs to us. Hand 'em over, and maybe we leave you breathing." Jesse smiled grimly. "Yeah? Maybe you turn around and I don't feed you your teeth." There was a murmur among the men, a few chuckles, low and humorless. Victor's face tightened, a flicker of annoyance betraying the otherwise polished mask. "You don't understand who you're dealing with, boy," Victor said, stepping forward. "This isn't about you. It's not personal. Hand over the subjects, and we'll be on our way." Subjects. As if Ash, Copper, and Luna were just lab equipment, not living beings that had fought to survive. Jesse spat into the dust. "You want them? Come and take them." Victor didn't even give the order aloud. He just flicked 2 fingers forward, and the men moved. Jesse fired the first warning shot over their heads. The crack of the rifle split the evening air like lightning, sending a couple of the mercenaries ducking reflexively. But they kept coming, fanning out to surround the barn and the house, cautious but confident. Inside the barn, Luna whinnied sharply. Ash let out a guttural sound, half challenge, half warning, and Copper started pawing at the stall door, itching for action. "Now or never," Jesse muttered, vaulting off the porch and sprinting toward the barn, heart hammering against his ribs. Ash met him halfway, the Mustang's muscles taut, nostrils flaring. Jesse knelt quickly, looping a rope halter around Ash's neck, not to restrain him, but to guide him. He knew these horses weren't just survivors anymore. They were warriors in their own right. Inside the barn, Jesse grabbed an old satchel slung over a hook, his emergency bag, packed days ago when Sheriff Rourke had warned trouble might come. He shoved it over his shoulder without thinking. Shots cracked behind him. Not aimed at him, yet, but at the air, trying to herd him into panic. "Ash, Copper, Luna, move!" Jesse barked. Copper bolted through the barn doors first, zigzagging across the open yard in frantic, looping patterns that kicked up enough dust to obscure the mercenaries' lines of sight. Ash stayed close to Jesse, moving low and deliberate, like a soldier trained for battlefield maneuvers. And Luna, sweet, timid Luna, froze halfway across the yard, trembling as headlights pinned her in place like a deer caught mid-step. "No, no, no, come on, girl," Jesse urged, waving his arms. But before he could reach her, a figure emerged from behind a truck. One of the Mercs, gun drawn, moving toward Luna. Across the yard, Jesse heard a sharp, terrified cry. Not from Luna, but from Tommy Price, the neighbor's kid. Somehow, in the chaos, the boy had slipped through the fence, clutching a baseball bat way too big for him, his face pale under the dusty light. "Tommy!" Jesse shouted. Two Mercs spotted the kid and started toward him. Without thinking, Luna surged forward, her fear overridden by something deeper, instinct maybe, or the fragile trust she'd found at Jesse's side. She charged between Tommy and the men, skidding to a stop and kicking up a cloud of dirt so thick the Mercs staggered back, coughing. Tommy scrambled toward Jesse, who swept the boy up with one arm and shoved him behind a hay bale for cover. The night exploded into chaos. Gunshots, shouts, the pounding of hooves. Jesse fired twice, hitting the dirt near a Merc's boots and sending him diving for cover. Sheriff Rourke's sirens howled in the distance, growing louder with every heartbeat. Victor Maddox bellowed orders, furious. "Get the assets! Forget the rest!" Ash wasn't having it. The big gray Mustang barreled straight through a group of Mercs, scattering them like bowling pins. Copper, wild and fearless, darted through gaps, nipping at heels, sending men sprawling into the dust. Jesse knelt beside Tommy, reloading with shaking hands. "You stay here, buddy. Don't move unless I tell you." Tommy nodded, wide-eyed, clutching the bat like a lifeline. The screech of tires tore through the night as the sheriff's trucks finally roared onto the scene. Deputies leapt out, guns drawn. "Drop your weapons!" Sheriff Rourke barked through a bullhorn. For a heartbeat, the Mercs hesitated. Some started to lower their weapons. Others kept them raised, caught between their orders and the sudden, overwhelming presence of law enforcement. Victor's voice rang out furious. "Fall back!" Fall back. The Mercs scrambled, retreating toward their trucks. But it was too late. Deputies surrounded them. Sheriff Rourke himself moved in, handcuffing Victor Maddox with a rough shove against a patrol truck's hood. "You picked the wrong county to start a war in, boy," the sheriff growled. Meanwhile, Jesse sprinted toward the barn where a final scuffle had broken out. Derek Sloan, the snake who had lurked in the shadows days ago, was grappling with Ash, trying to throw a lasso around the Mustang's neck. "Get off him!" Jesse roared, slamming into Derek like a linebacker. They went down hard, fists flew, dirt and blood sprayed into the air. Derek was strong, fueled by desperation, but Jesse was stronger, and fueled by something even deeper. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Ash, for Copper, for Luna, for the second chance he hadn't even known he needed. Ash backed off, giving Jesse room. Jesse drove his fist into Derek's gut, winding him, then pinned him with a knee to the chest, until deputies tore Derek away and slapped cuffs on him. As the dust settled, the scene came into brutal clarity. Victor Maddox and his men, shackled and furious. Sheriff Rourke barking orders. Dr. Monroe arriving in a battered jeep, a medical kit in hand, rushing to check on the wounded, animal and human alike. And Jesse, kneeling in the dirt, arms around Ash's thick neck, forehead pressed to the Mustang's damp coat, whispering thanks he couldn't even fully put into words. The fight was over, for now. But in the gathering night, as Luna nuzzled Tommy's hair and Copper pranced in exhausted victory, Jesse realized something had shifted deep inside him. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was something bigger, something worth building, worth protecting, worth living for, The first light of dawn cracked over Red Mesa Valley, painting the sky in strokes of soft pink and molten gold. The world felt quieter now, somehow, as if the land itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Jesse Walker sat on the front porch of the old ranch house, the wood beneath him worn smooth by decades of sun and storms. His coffee sat forgotten by his side, cooling in the morning breeze. Ash stood close, the gray Mustang's coat glinting silver in the rising sun, ears pricked, eyes steady. They had survived. No, more than survived. They had carved out something worth keeping. The weeks following the siege had been a blur of rebuilding. Sheriff Dean Rourke had stayed true to his word, making sure the evidence against GEC was cataloged, reported, and most importantly, broadcast. The news had traveled fast, and the outrage had been faster. Under public pressure and mounting legal cases, GEC folded on itself like a rotten barn under its own weight. Arrests were made, secrets were dragged into the light. No one could erase what had been done, but at least now the ones responsible would pay. And Jesse. He finally had a clear path ahead. Whispering Creek Sanctuary. That's what he decided to call it. A place where creatures like Ash, Copper, and Luna, creatures tossed aside like broken tools, could heal, could be free. The old barn got a new coat of paint. The broken fences were mended. Water troughs were repaired, shade shelters put up, and a new sign carved by Jesse's own hand hung proudly over the entrance. Whispering Creek Sanctuary, a place for the forgotten. The local community, once distant, now rallied around the ranch. Folks dropped off extra feed, old tack, supplies. A few volunteers, teenagers looking for summer work, old cowboys looking for purpose, started coming by to help. Somehow, the tragedy that almost destroyed them had sown the seeds of a new family. Luna was the first to leave. It wasn't goodbye, not really. Lillian Parker, a retired teacher and widow who lived in a quiet house just outside town, came to the sanctuary one crisp morning, cane tapping against the dusty ground. She had lost her husband the year before, and the loneliness had settled in her bones like a slow, aching frost. When Luna, shy and delicate as a falling feather, nuzzled into Lillian's side with surprising gentleness, Jesse saw the connection spark to life. "She's beautiful," Lillian whispered, stroking Luna's creamy neck with trembling hands. "She's yours if you want her," Jesse said, voice thick with feeling. "She needs someone who understands gentle." So Luna left in the back of Lillian's old horse trailer, her soft eyes watching Jesse until the very last turn of the dirt road hid her from view. Then came Copper's turn. A therapy organization from Tucson reached out after hearing the sanctuary's story. They ran programs for children with autism, using horses to bridge the silent worlds those children often lived in. They were looking for a horse who could be lively but patient, playful but safe. Copper fit the role perfectly. Jesse wasn't ready to let him go either, but when he saw Copper in the therapy paddock, a boy laughing, actually laughing, as the red colt snorted and chased a rubber ball across the arena, he knew he'd made the right call. "You're going to be a hero, buddy," Jesse murmured the day he delivered Copper to the center, giving the young Mustang a last pat on the shoulder. "Bigger than I ever could have been." And Ash stayed. Jesse couldn't imagine it any other way. Ash was more than a horse. Ash was a part of him now. The steady heartbeat beside his own, the quiet shadow that had dragged him out of his own darkness and stood firm when Jesse had felt like crumbling. They worked the ranch together every morning, checked the pastures together every evening. Ash learned Jesse's voice, Jesse's hands, Jesse's heart. And Jesse, somehow, learned to trust again, through a bond stronger than any bloodline. Together, they began taking in more rescues, abandoned donkeys, an old broken-down mare, even a half-wild dog with one ear chewed to a nub. Whispering Creek became a patchwork of misfits who somehow fit together. One evening, long after the summer heat had broken and the first hint of fall was in the air, Jesse sat on the porch with Ash at his side. A cool wind stirred the dust along the dirt road. Overhead, the stars blinked to life one by one. Jesse leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke aloud to the fading horizon. "We didn't just survive." His voice was steady, almost reverent. Ash shifted closer, the tip of his nose brushing Jesse's shoulder. "We found a reason to live." The land around him, the ranch, the battered barn, the vast open sky, seemed to breathe with him. A soft, quiet promise that no matter what storms came, no matter what wounds they carried, this would always be home. Whispering Creek Sanctuary, a place where broken things weren't thrown away, where lost souls, human and animal alike, could find their way back to the light. Together,